Okay, so let's say you get home from work one day, right? And you check the mail, and bam, there's this stack of legal papers staring you right in the face. You've been sued by a debt collector. I mean, it's enough to make anyone totally freak out, right?
Oh, yeah.
But before you totally lose it,
Uh-huh.
you know, we're going to dive into some expert advice today from this YouTube channel called Consumer Warrior to help you figure out what to do. So
That's like a good plan.
we're going to be tapping into the wisdom of this Arizona attorney, John Skiba. And this guy's been through over 400 debt-related trials.
Wow.
So he definitely knows his stuff. We're focusing specifically on his video called Getting Sued by a Debt Collector. Do this first. Because as he says, those initial steps you take, those can make all the difference.
Absolutely.
You know what's so scary about this kind of stuff? I think it's just the unknown, like all this legal jargon, the deadlines, the court process. It just feels like this big black hole.
Can be really intimidating.
But Skiba says just understanding the process, like knowing what to expect, that can actually bring a huge sense of relief.
Oh, for sure. There's a big psychological component to this, too. When we feel like we're not in control, our stress levels just go crazy.
Oh, absolutely. It's like that feeling right before you're about to give a presentation.
Yeah.
And you haven't even had time to prepare. Your heart's racing, you're sweating.
Yeah, exactly. Like a job interview or something.
But with a legal battle, it's even worse because the stakes are so much higher.
For sure. For sure.
And just having some kind of plan, even a simple one, can help you feel a lot more in control.
Right.
Which means less anxiety and hopefully better decisions, right?
Definitely.
So let's get down to the nitty-gritty here.
Mm-hmm.
What's the very first thing Skiba says you should do when you get served with those legal papers?
Well, he says you need to grab the summons.
Okay.
And it's not just some random document. It's like your official notice of the lawsuit. It's going to tell you when you need to file your answer, which is basically your response to the lawsuit.
Gotcha.
And if you miss that deadline, there can be some serious consequences.
Yeah, see, this is where I would totally mess up. It's so easy to think, oh, it's just paperwork, I'll deal with it later. But in this case, procrastination is not your friend.
No, not at all.
So what happens if you don't file your answer on time?
Well, the court can issue what's called a default judgment.
Okay, in plain English, what does that mean?
Basically, it means the debt collector automatically wins the case. And they can start taking steps to get their money from you.
Yikes.
It's like wage garnishment.
Like taking money right out of your paycheck.
Exactly. Or they could even freeze your bank account.
Okay, so ignoring those papers is definitely not an option. Now, I think a lot of people, myself included, we might assume that the clock starts ticking from like when the court filed the lawsuit.
Right.
But you're saying it's actually from the day that I'm served with the papers.
Exactly. That date is crucial. It's from that day that you have a specific number of days to file your answer. For example, in Arizona, it's 20 days.
Okay.
But it does vary by state. So definitely make sure to check your local rules.
So if I were you listening to this, I would grab that summons right now and mark that deadline on your calendar, like in big, bold letters. Maybe even give yourself a couple extra days just to be safe.
Yeah, that's a great idea. It's always better to be safe than sorry.
But is it really that common for people to just ignore these lawsuits? I mean, are we talking like a handful of people, or is this more widespread?
It's actually way more common than you'd think. John Skiba says that over 95% of debt collection lawsuits go unanswered.
95%. Are you serious? So just by filing an answer, you're already ahead of most people.
Exactly. It shows the court and the debt collector that you're taking this seriously. You're ready to defend yourself.
Okay, now I'm starting to understand why Skiban calls this the most important thing to do first. It kind of puts you back in the driver's seat, gives you a hiding chance. But even the phrase legal battle makes me want to hide.
Oh, yeah, I get it.
I'm sure some of our listeners are feeling the same way.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's natural to feel that way. Nobody wants to get caught up in a long legal battle. But here's the thing. Filing that answer might actually help you resolve things quicker.
Really? So we're not necessarily talking years in court mountains of paperwork.
Maybe not. By filing your answer, you're showing the debt collector that you're serious.
Oh,
And sometimes that can lead to an early settlement.
so you mean reaching an agreement with the debt collector before going to trial?
Exactly.
That sounds way better. But wouldn't that make me look guilty? Like I'm admitting that I owe them money even if I don't.
That's a common concern, but there's a safeguard for that. It's called Rule 408 of the Rules of Evidence.
Okay. I have no idea what that means.
Basically, it means that any settlement offers or conversations you have with the debt collector are protected and can't be used against you in court. So you're free to explore those options without it backfiring.
Okay, that's good to know. So I can try to work things out with them without shooting myself in the foot legally. But let's say those talks don't go anywhere. Or I decide to fight this thing all the way. How do I actually file this answer we keep talking about?
Well, it can seem intimidating, but John Skiba actually provides a template for an answer. It's in the description of his YouTube video. He even has a tutorial video walking you through the steps.
Awesome. So while we can't link to the video directly, we definitely recommend checking out those resources if you're in this situation. And you know what? Just by taking the time to understand these first few steps, you're already doing better than the vast majority of people who get hit with these lawsuits.
It's true. Taking that first step can make a huge difference.
So we've covered a lot of ground already, but there's still more to come in this deep dive. Stay tuned, because after a quick break, we'll be back to explore even more about debt collection lawsuits, including some surprising defense strategies that you might not know about.
This is getting good.
It is. It is. Stick with us. All right, so we're back. And I got to say, I'm feeling a little more confident just knowing those first steps.
That's great.
Yeah, but let's dig a little deeper now. We filed our answer. We're officially in the game. But how do we actually play to win this thing?
Well, it helps to understand how these debt collectors operate. A lot of times they buy up old debts for pennies on the dollar. So their whole business model is based on volume and intimidation.
So they're not really focusing on individual cases. It's more like a numbers game.
Exactly. They're hoping that if they file enough lawsuits, people will just give in, either because they're scared or they just don't think it's worth fighting.
That's kind of creepy. But you said earlier that they still have to prove their case in court, right? They can't just show up and say, you owe us money. They have to show proof.
Absolutely. They can't just make demands. They have to provide documentation, real evidence that shows you that they actually owe the debt and that they have the right to collect it.
I never realized that.
Oh.
So what kind of proof are we talking about? What should we be looking for?
Well, first of all, you want to check the statute of limitations.
Okay.
Every state has a time limit on how long a debt collector has to sue you for a debt.
So even if I did owe the money, at some point, if it's been like 10 years, they can't come after me.
It depends. The exact time limit varies by state and the type of debt. But if the statute of limitations has passed, you definitely want to point that out. It could be enough to get the whole case dismissed.
Statute of limitations, got it. What else should we be looking at?
Another thing to watch out for is the amount they're claiming you owe. Sometimes debt collectors try to inflate the amount by adding on fees and interest, stuff that might not even be legally justified.
So they could be trying to squeeze more money out of me than they're actually entitled to.
It happens more often than you think. That's why it's important to double-check their calculations and compare it to any original documentation you might have.
This is making me wonder, is it even possible to do all this without a lawyer?
It is possible, but it can be really tough. Having a lawyer on your side can make a world of difference, especially if you have a complicated case or the debt collector is playing hardball.
I can see that. A lawyer can help with all the legal procedures and the paperwork, and maybe even negotiate with the debt collector for me.
Exactly. They know the ins and outs of debt collection law, and they can make sure you're protected every step of the way.
Okay, so we've talked about checking the statute of limitations and making sure the debt amount is accurate. What other defense strategies are out there?
Well, sometimes you might find that the debt doesn't even belong to you.
What?
Identity theft is a real problem these days. It's possible that someone else racked up the debt using your information.
That's terrifying. But how would you even prove something like that?
You'd need to gather evidence to support your claim. Things like police reports, credit reports, any communication you had with the creditor about the fraud.
Okay, so this is starting to feel a little overwhelming.
I understand. It's a lot to keep track of. That's why it's super important to stay organized throughout this whole process. Keep a record of all your communication with the debt collector, like dates, times, what was said, and keep all the documents together in one safe place.
Organization is key. Got it. But what if after all this, I actually do owe the debt? Does that mean I've automatically lost?
Not at all. Even if you owe the debt, you still have options. You might be able to negotiate a payment plan that works for you, or settle the debt for a lower amount.
So even if I'm in the wrong day, there might be ways to find a solution that works for me.
Exactly. Remember, the goal is to find a resolution that gets you back on track financially.
Wow, this has been so eye-opening. We've gone from feeling totally lost to realizing there are actual steps we can take to protect ourselves. But I know we've only scratched the surface of what can happen in court.
That's true. The courtroom itself can be intimidating, but understanding the basics can help a lot.
Well, then let's take a deep breath and head into part 3 of this deep dive, where we'll explore what to expect when you actually step foot in that courtroom. Okay, so we're back and ready to say some music. We've talked about strategy, we've talked about defense, but now let's get real. What actually happens when you walk into that courtroom? I'm already getting nervous just thinking about it.
I know it can be pretty intimidating. But remember, the courtroom is supposed to be a place of fairness, due process. And just understanding how things work can help you feel a lot more comfortable.
Okay, I like the sound of that. So walk us through it. What can we expect? Is it anything like what we see on TV?
Well, the courtroom itself might look kind of similar, but the actual process is usually a lot less dramatic. Typically, things start with something called discovery.
Discovery, what's that?
It's basically the information gathering stage. It's a chance for both sides, you and the debt collector, to exchange evidence and information.
So they can't just spring new stuff on me in the middle of the trial.
Nope. Everything has to be laid out beforehand.
Okay, so it's my chance to see what they've got and prepare my defense.
Exactly. During discovery, you can request documents from the debt collector, ask them written questions, those are called interrogatories, and you can even interview witnesses under oath. That's called a deposition.
Wow, so there's a lot going on behind the scenes before we even get to the hearing. I can definitely see how having a lawyer would be helpful during this phase.
Oh yeah, for sure. A lawyer can help you navigate all the complexities of discovery, make sure you meet all the deadlines, and build a strong case based on the evidence.
Okay, let's fast forward a bit. Discovery is over. We've got our evidence. And now we're stepping into the courtroom for the actual hearing. What's that like?
Well, you'll be in front of a judge, and both sides will have a chance to present their arguments and evidence. You'll get to tell your side of the story, present witnesses, and challenge the debt collector's claims.
So this is where all those detailed records come in handy. Having everything organized and documented can really make a difference.
Absolutely. It's crucial to have clear, organized documentation to support your case. And don't forget, you also have the right to cross-examine the debt collector's witnesses.
Meaning I can ask them questions and try to poke holes in their story.
Exactly. You're looking for inconsistencies, weaknesses in their evidence. Anything that helps your case.
Okay, I'm starting to feel a little more empowered now. But what if, despite our best efforts, the judge rules against us? What happens then?
Well, first of all, it's important to remember that losing the initial case isn't the end of the road. You always have the right to appeal the decision.
So I can take it to a higher court and maybe get the ruling overturned.
That's right. An appeal gives you another bite at the apple. But even if you don't appeal, it's important to understand the consequences of a judgment against you.
Like wage garnishments and bank levies? Those become a real possibility.
Yeah, unfortunately. A judgment gives the debt collector the legal power to start collecting. And wage garnishment or bank levies are often their go-to tools. But even then, there might be ways to negotiate a payment plan or settle for a lower amount.
So even in worst-case scenario, there might still be options.
Exactly. It's all about knowing your rights, understanding the process, and exploring all the available options.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap things up. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, and I hope our listeners are feeling a little more informed and a lot less scared about debt collection lawsuits.
Me too. Knowledge is power. And I hope this has given everyone the tools they need to protect themselves.
Absolutely. And remember, if you're feeling overwhelmed, don't hesitate to reach out to a qualified attorney. They can help you navigate this process and fight for your rights. All right, folks, that's it for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time for another exploration of knowledge